Michael Leach. I am the guy that puts the messages on the website and edits them and cleans them and builds the website. I am sitting here today with my parents, and Matt and Helen Leach, and with my wife Adele. And we were just going to have them kind of tell their story about how they got involved with CFO clear back 8 million years ago. Right, Dad? Is that like 1950s? And how they started recording and how the library came to be. I think I cut off a snarky remark. Are you going to make one? No, he's just laughing. All right.
Well, I would like to go back a bit further than that in time.
Why don't we start with, introduce yourselves a bit. Like, where are you?
Well, I am Matt Leach. I am the father of Michael, and I am not responsible for him anymore.
Were you ever responsible for me?
Well, your mother says I am.
So where did you grow up, Pa? Where are you from?
All right. I grew up in Western New York, in a little town, in the country. And the nearest community was called Garwoods. But I got to go back beyond that. I was born in Bethesda Hospital in Hornell, New York. And when my sister saw me, they told her that I was from Sears. And she really did say, "Can we send him back?"
Anna Linda wanted to send you back?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I've met you. I don't blame her.
But then my folks were living in a town called Woodhull, New York, about 30 or 40 miles from Hornell. So Hornell was the big hospital for Woodhull. My mother was a trained nurse, and my grandfather, Mom's dad, developed cancer. And because Mom was the nurse, we all moved up to be near them in on the farm, which is 5 miles from a little town called Canasarega, and about 2 miles from a little community called Garwoods. So I went to school in Canasarega Central School. We went to the church there in Garwoods, and my folks always went to church. Even my dad. And in some of the papers that he wrote, he did mention that one of the things that had crossed his mind when he was growing up was that he should be a preacher. But that was never worked out that way. And as I grew up, I don't know why I got labeled as, so people thought I was going to be a preacher. I didn't think so. And I had to go through a period of rebellion against that idea.
What did you think you were going to be?
Well, when I came out of the Army, I took the battery of aptitude tests, and I was good for an osteopathic physician or a minister. And so I decided that I wanted to be the osteopathic physician. And that's where I came to Iowa, was I needed some undergraduate courses in order to apply to medical school. And I was going to come out and take those. But that's something else. When I was in one of the I've always been interested in magic, fascinated by it. And I remember one time that there was an article about Abbott's Magic Company in the Sunday paper. And my dad, who also liked magic, um, bought bought me a few little tricks. So that was how I got started in that way. But then we have to, when I was in, I think it was when I got to be in high school, that a young man came to be our pastor named Jim Cole. And he had come earlier. We used to have what were called youth rallies. The churches provided the activities for youth back in my childhood because the schools had not yet taken over everything.
So just for context, this is back in the 1940s because you were born in 1932.
Yeah.
So it'd be mid 40s, like probably just after World War II was over.
Yeah, I graduated in 51. And so Jim Cole came, and he had come as the guest as a magician for one of our youth rallies. It was a whole different thing growing up back then, because in the rural area where I grew up, the only thing going for youth was the church and the church activities. So we youth would get together and plan our stuff.
So is it like such a small area? There wasn't like a lot of high school sports even or things like that, or?
The high school sports hadn't taken over yet. They started to take over when in my junior and senior year, but I remember the principal announcing that they were going to concentrate on sports. So it was like that was the entry into sports, where you began to go to state and all that stuff. But prior to that, there wasn't anything. So we made our own fun and in our own youth groups. And so we would have youth rallies where we would invite youth from all the surrounding churches. And that was our socializing. Then, but Jim Cole, when he came, he was interested in a man by the name of Glenn Clark. And he preached a few times on Glenn Clark's teachings on prayer. And he found out that there are these camps farthest out. And there was going to be one in Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire. And so a bunch of us decided that we wanted to go. And I went full time. I had to take a public bus, Greyhound, up to Winnipesaukee. And the others came up later. And we took turns coming home. We took turns driving the car. And of course, it was my turn to drive. And it had been raining so hard that the water in the ditches was up to the level of the road. And I made a mistake of pulling off the road. And we were lucky to get out of that ditch.
How old were you at the time, this first camp? Was it?
Maybe 17.
And your parents were like, yeah, sure, see you a week later.
Sure. They were glad to get rid of me for a week.
Different time back then, but
yeah. Things were safe then. My senior class went to New York City on a senior trip. That was a time when we used to do those things, and it was safe. And the only rules that they had for us was we had to check in at a certain time, and we were not allowed to go alone. But the streets were perfectly safe. And so they never worried about us because somebody always knew where we were.
Did you have teachers with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was...
I mean, that was 80 years ago, just about. Yeah.
It was such a different time and a different climate. And without the crime, without the violence, without all of the disrespect and stuff that you find now. So that it was a wonderfully safe place. And at night it was fascinating to walk the streets of New York City and see all the stores that were open all night long and wander in and see what they were selling. And just a different age, a different time. Well, that was in 1950 was my first CFO. That's where I was introduced to Rufus Mosley.
Who were the speakers? Do you remember?
What?
Who were the speakers at that camp you went
Rufus
to?
Mosley.
Rufus Mosley
Was one, and can't remember the name of the lady, but Ruth Robinson.
Ruth Robinson
was the lady, and Frank Laubach had stopped in, and I think Glenn Clark had stopped in to that camp too. But that's when I first heard of Frank Laubach and learned about his literacy program. And then
So interesting thing about Frank Laubach and his literacy program. I live in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area, and I was doing a delivery for an old job too. We did tape duplications for this place called Literacy and Evangelism.
Yeah.
So I'm doing a delivery, and I said to the lady as I'm delivering it, this reminds me of a speaker that I've heard of. We've had some tapes of, a guy named Frank Laubach, and she doesn't say anything. She just points behind me. And I turn around to the wall, and it says, thank you to our founders, and it was Frank Laubach's picture right there. Yeah. That he had founded this thing in Tulsa, and I never even knew.
Yeah. And he stayed a few nights with us.
Oh, at your mom and dad's house?
No, in Waterloo.
In Waterloo?
Rufus Mosley stayed with us in Waterloo, or in Garwoods.
Oh, you mean, so like years later when you were pastoring in Waterloo, Frank Laubach stayed at your house?
No.
Or?
Frank Laubach, yes. When we were in Waterloo, he was trying to organize a world literacy program and get state organizations set up. And so he stayed at our home and worked from our home to work on that.
Oh, that's really neat. But so that was in Waterloo, Iowa. I don't think we actually said that, but we're in Iowa recording right now. This is at my parents' house. But so Rufus Mosley stayed at your parents' house?
Yes.
Oh wow.
No, not at parents.
Oh, not at your parents' house?
Oh, Rufus.
Yeah, Rufus.
Yeah, Rufus stayed at my parents' house.
Oh, that's wow. I never knew that. That's kind of cool.
And I think that really settled it for Dad for his commitment to Christ, because he was just taken in by Rufus.
Wow.
In fact, Rufus was this old man, and he ate raw peanuts. Always, whatever he got out his peanut thing and did raw peanuts on everything he ate. And that guy, the kids wouldn't leave him alone.
He had that. If you ever listen to some of his messages, like we have in the library, you can tell he's always trying to think with God on his mind. He does all the time. He's like, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Always nonstop. Praise you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. But yeah, Rufus, he would so often in these talks you listen to, it almost make it hard to listen to at times when he's preaching. But at the same time, it captivates you with what he's saying and doing. You were saying that the youth were attracted to these guys.
Yes.
Something drew them to these older speakers.
And to me, that simply says that when the youth are they hunger for authentic, not just people who mouth things like you see in churches. So many people sit in churches are not authentic Christians. They believe they are, but what are they like on the way to church and on the way home?
But it's like people that have, accepted Jesus as their Savior, but not really made it that everyday walk of their life.
Yeah. And these CFO leaders, it was for real. And the youth knew that. Youth know whether you're for real or not.
So you went to this camp in Winnipesaukee in 1950.
Yes.
And I believe I have some slides from some of those. It might be from a later one, but I might put some of those into this. But what was it that hooked you to it that first trip? Like, was there something significant that helped you?
When I stepped off the bus at Winnipesaukee, it was like walking into another world. And that world was heaven. Because people actually lived love. And it didn't matter who you were, you got loved. You didn't have an opportunity to go off by yourself and have a pity party, because people were just sensitive to who needs love. And of course, that catches. And by the end of the week, you yourself are becoming a conveyor of love. An experience that Helen wanted me to tell was I was sitting on a bench. There was a big courtyard in the center around all of the different buildings. And there was a park bench there, and I was just sitting on it. And this old lady, and they nicknamed her the Flea. And
the Flea?
But they nicknamed her the Flea, but it was a term of endearment as far as the youth were concerned. And she came and sat down by me. And she was drawn to do that. And she just sat there and loved on me. And all of a sudden, I realized that God loves me. Just by the fact that she allowed that love to flow into me that was in her. And I think a lot of times as youth, the one thing we're hungering for is love. And we want to know, am I worth something? Am I important? This is part of growing up, is answering those questions. And then to have someone just love you and allow God's love to flow through you, it's world changing.
I remember back to even as me as a kid, my favorite CFOer at the Iowa CFO was a lady by the name of Hazel Sloan. And that lady just loved on us little kids. And I remember like always being excited because you were on the council ring a lot at the Iowa CFO. And I would remember getting to camp and getting excited because we always had the day before camp, we'd go and pray for all the rooms where all the people were staying. And I remember getting teamed up with Hazel to go pray for the rooms. Me and another guy got teamed up with Hazel and being excited because it meant we got to spend 2 hours hanging out with Hazel. Which, if you think about it, I was probably under 10, and had to be 60s at that point, 60s, maybe 70s. And the fact that you have someone at that age that gets little kids excited to hang out with you, but it's because she just loved on us. She'd always act really excited to see you and always and I always remembered that about Hazel. She was always, I remember I was kind of sad when she went on to heaven, but it was, she's ready to go. But yeah, I remember that as a kid that impacted me was like the people that just loved and cared about you.
So did that lady say anything to you? Like, did she come and talk to you? Or did she pretty much just sit there?
I think she asked me if there was anything she asked how I was. And as far as I was concerned, I was okay. But what I didn't know was that through her loving me, I would finally realize that God loved me.
It's also the difference between somebody wasn't just saying, hey, how are you, like a greeting, which is how we normally use it. It was actually someone sitting there asking you, really wanting to know, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
Which is different. Do you remember her name, or other than the flea?
No, I don't.
Don't remember. Well, maybe somebody from the Winnipesaukee camp, from back then, would know who the flea was. But
yeah. We had a nice youth group back at that time, and so I've been to Winnipesaukee twice. Once was the first time, and the second time was when I got back from the service and went to Winnipesaukee
so
for the second time.
Fill in a little bit. So after high school, you were going to get drafted. It was in 19.
Well,
was that
after high school? I worked a year because I was going to save money.
Like
and
father, like son.
Like father, like son?
Yeah.
I also worked a year after high school to save money. It didn't. So
Didn't work out any better for
no,
your
we both
dad.
learned how to spend really well.
So, but I had this teacher in high school who made the statement that he was sorry to hear me say that I was going to work a year, because he said people who do that don't end up going on. And I thought, well, I'm going to go whether, regardless of what he says. He was one of my favorite teachers. And so I went to Drew University. And after 2 years at Drew University, I decided afterwards that my high school, in order to let all of the students, regardless of their abilities, to have a good record. So they lowered down the
requirements.
The requirements. And so I was not properly prepared for college. And some of the people that were in my college, my freshman class in college, they had really been given the works in high school, and they passed out of their having to take English. I took English. I wrote a paper that would have gotten me an A in high school, an A+. Got an F.
You say it was a little bit of a rough first little stint in college, is that right?
Yeah. So anyway, at the end of 2 years, Drew University had a motto, an adventure in excellence. And at the end of 2 years, they informed me that I did not qualify for the adventure.
In excellence? You were not excellently adventuring at Drew University.
So I, instead of waiting around for the Army to get around to me for the draft, I volunteered for the draft.
Because it was you were going to get called up anyway.
Yeah.
Because were you deferred because of college?
Yes.
But like when you flunked out of college.
Yeah, I was going to be called up in the fall.
Yeah.
And I volunteered and got in July.
So then you could pick like your area of service if you did that, right?
No.
No?
That's what they try to tell you nowadays. But in those days, they would say, I don't care if you have a PhD. We need a tank driver.
So now you're a tank driver.
That actually happened to one of the people in because there were several people like me who had volunteered in order to get in and get it over with. And they had their degrees, but we need you in the infantry. We need you to cook. That was not always a good choice.
And you ended up as a desk clerk and radio operator in Berchtesgaden, Germany? Is that how you ended up? What am I remembering?
You're mixing up two stories.
Uh-oh.
No, I was sent to Straubing, Germany, and I was a desk clerk there, except when we had field maneuvers. And then I always ended up with the Jeep, because I was assigned a Jeep anyway, but everybody was using it, so I didn't have to maintain it or wash it. And I drove the Jeep on to the maneuvers, but then they took my Jeep over, and I didn't have to drive it back, so I didn't have to clean it. But I got the fun of driving. And a fascinating thing about driving and maneuvers is that as you're on your way, the front vehicle maintains a certain pace, like it will go 30 miles an hour. But by the time you get to the end, you're going to sit and wait 20 minutes, and then you're going to drive like the wind. There was another word I thought of. Drive like the wind to catch up. And you catch up and stop. So the tail end was like being whipped back and forth. So it was always more interesting to drive it on the end. I drove on the front, and there was always an officer next to me when I was driving on the front. And we were just maintaining that same speed.
Whereas at the end of the trail of the convoy, you're having to either speed up or slow down to stay caught up.
Yeah.
So you had, I know we have, it's on a different thing that we're putting out, which is you have an interesting testimony of getting to the Holy Land while you were serving.
Okay.
And how God taught you about prayer through that. We don't have to tell the whole thing here, but you can kind of give it in short because we.
Yeah, we haven't got very far in CFO yet.
Yeah. God, the Ferris Liskey and myself, God set us up and taught us about prayer. And we didn't know that we were learning. But afterwards, it became very clear that we were practicing the rules for getting your prayers answered. So we went to a religious retreat and heard a chaplain talk about the Holy Land and going in a canoe, not a canoe, a rubber craft down the Jordan River. And it just came to us. We wanted to go. Well, we didn't have enough money to buy plane tickets and all that to do it. And we knew that if we were to have that trip, God would have to give it to us. It's the only way that it would happen. So we decided, well, it didn't make sense to just sit back and wait until God finally said yes. No, we just started saying, we're going to the Holy Land. And we applied. We set the date that we wanted to go. And we applied because you have to get permission. Orders have to be written such that you have written permission to be where you're at.
So if anyone asks you why are you there, you can show your orders and not get arrested.
You're not
AWOL. Yeah.
So we did that. And we began just saying, we're going. We kept praying and, asking God, what about it? But we did and confessed. We confessed the thing we wanted, and we took all the appropriate actions. When I say all, I mean getting shots.
Like you acted as if you were going, even though you were acting like you believed you received when you prayed.
Yeah.
To where, like, if I'm going, because I remember, well, the story, I have a whole video where you did it, we'll put out in a bit, but like you even flew out on the Army plane, not even knowing if you could make it to the Holy Land.
Yeah.
But you just left with your bags.
Yeah. And, there was always the thought that, well, what if it doesn't turn out? So we got clearance to visit surrounding nations surrounding Germany. But we also knew that the Air Force has what they call hops, that if there's space available, they'll supply you with a parachute and you sit in a bucket seat on the plane. And a lot of servicemen were doing that.
It's free plane ride as long as you don't mind sitting in a bad seat for a few hours.
And so we took the train to Frankfurt, and we went to the main airport there, and nothing showed. So we decided to go to the neighboring airport, military airport, which was in Wiesbaden. And we just sat there and we prayed and we waited. And we were waiting for a plane going south. Well, finally, at the end of the first day, we got a motel room, a barracks room, because the Air Force would supply you with cheaper accommodations. And we came back the next day, and we waited and waited and waited. Didn't get a single word from God, and waited. And finally we made the decision that if by 6 o'clock that night there were no planes going south, we would take the first plane going north to England. And so 6 o'clock came, and we boarded the plane going to England. We got to England and were taken by an army bus or a military bus to the servicemen's hotel. And we looked at the bulletin board, which posted all the flights going any place, and there was nothing going south. So we just retired that night, and thinking that the next day we would see what we could do about touring London and England. But the next morning, I looked at the bulletin board, and a plane was scheduled to fly to Nieuwersir Air Force Base in North Africa. And the moment I saw the sign, I just knew God had said yes. And it was just a matter of following what he had outlined. Now, we didn't realize it at the time, but we were asking God to rearrange Air Force plans of the United States Air Force just to accommodate us.
And he did it.
And he not only did that, God said, there is no way I can let these two naive soldiers let loose. So when we got out of the plane in Egypt, a man introduced himself. He was Charles L. Benton, the director of business and finance at the University of Maryland, and he was going around to the different schools that they had. And he just wanted to know if we could share a taxi ride into Cairo because it would be cheaper. And then we discovered he also was planning to go to Jerusalem.
So God set you up, not only that, they set you up with a guide that could put you in touch with all the right people to go and do everything you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And probably more than you thought you would have gotten done.
Yes.
So we don't have to repeat the whole thing here because we're doing it on something else. But
we better get back to CFO.
Get back to CFO.
Thank you for listening to the CFO Classics Library podcast brought to you by Shepherd Ministries, Incorporated. To learn more about the CFO Classics Library, please visit our website at www.cfoclassicslibrary.org. To learn more about the Camps Farthest Out and how they can help you grow in your walk with God, or to find a camp near you, please visit their website at cfonorthamerica.org.